What are you going to do? Kill me?
Oh, no, of course not. He is.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. This is a quote by the legendary French poet and essayist Charles Baudelaire. And during their era of twist-reveal villains, I think that this is what Disney pulled from the file. They managed to develop a pretty great storyline, an impressive concept, and an interesting world, but the devil, the one who was supposed to be lurking behind the scenes, I think they kinda forgot about that part. That's at least what it looked like when we learned about the truth of Don Bellwether, who was spun off in the story as the wolf in sheep's clothing. For a villain to convince the world that they don't exist is a brilliant strategy, but Disney drew a lot of criticism for building Bellwether the way they did. In my opinion, the sheep had a lot of potential to become one of the most iconic villains that was demonstrated during the time. At this time though, Disney was still practicing the art of twist-reveal villains and hadn't yet quite mastered the concept of pulling them off. They did quite well with Ernesto, who was produced by Pixar and released a year after Bellwether. If you'd like to learn more about how to write a villain like that, you can go back and watch my video on him. With Bellwether, however, some things went amiss. So today, I'll explain where Disney went wrong with this villain, and how you can avoid making these mistakes while writing someone like her. Starting by the setting where all of this takes place. Disney's 2016 film Zootopia takes place in an alternate universe, or some centuries into the future where animals have evolved beyond their primal and basal instincts. Predators no longer hunt, and prey no longer fend for their lives.
Now, predator and prey live in harmony.
This is a world where Zootopia exists, a fictional cosmopolitan city that unites animals from all different backgrounds and allows them the right to peaceful coexistence. While the idea of coexistence is starting to gain acceptance around the world, there is still a certain amount of prejudice at play here, because wherever there is change, there is also a slight hint of fear. That hint of fear is precisely what Bellwether plays into her own agenda later on.
Fear always works.
By wedging a divide between predator and prey, one that the world has been trying to close forever, Bellwether aims to revert the world to its former status. The only evolution that she's ready to side with is for predators to recede into hiding and for prey to live out in the open. All of that happens later though. As the film unfolds, all we see before us is a quixotic bunny who dreams of becoming a cop in Zootopia. I'll discuss the contrast between Judy Hopps and Bellwether 2 today. Before I do that though, I'd like to mention something that I noted at the start of the film. As the core conflict in this setting is established, when the big mean bully tries to steal a bunch of tickets, did you notice that the people Judy defended were all sheep? Did you notice the kid in the play who sprays confetti on Judy and the leopard? Why were they all sheep? I mean, any other animal could have been getting bullied, like a pigeon for instance. Or a lamb. I thought that Disney was doing one of two things. They were either trying to point out that sheep were prey, or they were trying to establish grounds for Bellwether's later presence within the film. After all, if we've seen sheep a few times before, it would make sense that this prey was in majority, and makes sense for Bellwether to be elected as an assistant mayor. Despite her seat in the bureaucracy though, Bellwether didn't have a lot of power, not as much as her predator counterparts did anyway. While the mayor might have mandated a prey inclusivity program in bureaucratic and legal departments throughout Zootopia, he failed to give his assistant the recognition that she wanted. Maybe that was a faux pas though. We did observe later on that the mayor could be a tad dim-witted. Anyway, when Judy passed police school as the valedictorian of her class, she was excited to make it to Zootopia. She thought that this city would be far more inclusive and accommodating than her parents were towards predatory species. She was soon disillusioned, of course, and that whole thing was critical to the plot. In my opinion, Bellwether might have covertly encouraged prejudice among various animal species all along in order to achieve her objectives. But in order to draw plausible conjectures, we'd need to have more information about her. From a writing perspective, this is why incorporating incorporating a solid backstory is so important. With Bellwether, the writers seemed not to have thought so. They missed out on character development 101. I don't really understand what logic could have caused such a glaring error, but I did try to uncover it all, and I have a theory. Let me get into that right now, and then you guys can tell me if what I think is correct. In the era surrounding Zootopia, Disney was still trying to pull off twist-reveal villains by allowing us to know little to zilch about them. The same recipe was applied to Hans in Frozen, who I've also done an analysis on before. As I mentioned in that video too, trying to pull off a twist-reveal villain by showing them as a good guy while giving us zero context about their past is a lazy writing tool. While we could all clearly see that Bellwether was underappreciated by her boss, that wasn't sufficient grounds for her to hatch a master plot of elaborate villainy. I mean, come on, give us more context here. Where did she come from? What childhood beliefs of hers convinced her that predators were still evil and should be seen as such? All we know about Bellwether is that she was an assistant mayor, and even though the mayor might neither appreciate nor respect her, the police chief, Bogo, definitely did.
Assistant Mayor Bellwether.
He was actually scared of her, and that was why he rescinded Hops's termination and instead handed her the missing otter case. So why was Bellwether so prejudiced against the big guys? We all understand that her real motive and objective was power, but that's a characteristic of an egomaniacal villain, and throughout the film, Bellwether was the opposite of that. In this day and age, you can't just hand an audience a villain and say, well, they're evil, deal with it. You have to create a backstory that ties convincingly into their motives. One could purport that Bellwether was one of the sheep whose tickets Judy got back from Gidgen Gray at the start of the film. If that were the case, though, where was it demonstrated during the film? And if that were the case, then why would Bellwether be okay with trying to kill Judy in the end? And that too, for power? I guess that's a loose end we'll just have to live with. I understand that skimping out on a backstory, especially for a villain, can make them all the more terrifying. With Hans, Disney managed to justify the absence of a backstory by making him a sociopath or psychopath. In the comments on the previous video, you all pointed out that Hans was a psychopath, not a sociopath. Whoops. And well, just like Hans, Bellwether didn't express a lot of emotion either. That is, other than fear. And because of this, she was a poorly written character. The only time she ever seemed to passionately feel anything was during the end of the film, where she was all of a sudden switched up to a power-hungry egomaniacal mastermind of elaborate villainy that would put the likes of Megamind and Zira from Lion King to shame. But was power all that Bellwether ever wanted, or was there something more going on? That answer we will find in her motives. With Bellwether, Disney tried to draw from the concept of reverse racism, prejudice towards an oppressive class. If they'd kept it to that, things would have made sense, but they just kept going on, and the end result? Oh boy, it was not good. See, Bellwether feels that the little guys are underrepresented. That's why she's happy that there's a rabbit joining the police force in Zootopia.
Congratulations, Officer Hops. It's a real proud day for us little guys.
Then she seems to hate the predators for their evident power over prey. She doesn't say it outright, but it's there, especially when observed in comparison to Hop's ideas.
Us little guys really need to stick together, right?
And finally,
That's it. Prey fears predator and you stay in power?
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm not going to try to save the suspense here by mentioning what Bellwether did because, as you already know, she was the bad guy. She wanted to stay the mayor so bad that she was ready to let Judy die at the hands of a savage beast so that she could continue her stronghold over the city. But see, that's where I thought things got a little murky. Wasn't Bellwether pro-prey? If she was, why was she ready to let Judy die? And if she really did only care about herself and her position in the office, then why did she display no other signs of any such inclination throughout the duration of the film? People who inherently crave power often display subtle signs of this desire throughout their lives. How did Bellwether manage to keep it hidden? Is that why her hair is so big? Because it's full of secrets?
Underestimated, underappreciated. Aren't you sick of it?
And here, does she truly mean what she's saying, or is she prevaricating? Is she really that good of a politician? Like I said before, loose end. It seems as though even her motives weren't tied down clearly. When we observe Bellwether in comparison to Judy Hopps, we can see that Hopps just wants to make the world a better place where prey and predator walk hand in hand and sing Kumbaya. Her every move makes this crystal clear. Bellwether, on the other hand, helps Judy. When Judy first got her badge, we noticed that Bellwether drifted off into thought on stage. At this time, we all thought that Bellwether was a little absent at times, and that blended in perfectly with her milquetoast, unimposing presence. But having recently rewatched the film, I think that she was just deciding to put Hopps in charge of Lionheart's arrest. And considering the kind of person that she was, it made sense.
If you ever need anything, okay? You've always got a friend at City Hall, Judy. All right.
But then, if her motive truly was power, then why did she make Judy the public face of the ZPD? Was she trying to further a city-mandated campaign against the biology of predators? I understand that she had the resources to track everyone in Zootopia. That was why she knew where to find Judy in the end.
How did you know where to find us?
Because she's an evil, villainous mastermind, Judy. And what's more, she's the mayor of Zootopia. She has access to citywide cameras. But this makes logical sense, and that wasn't the first time Bellwether had shown up somewhere unexpectedly either.
Sir Hopps is taking the case.
So, considering the fact that this had happened before, why did Judy get a bad feeling from it? And why did that have to be the twist reveal? It just didn't sit quite right. It seemed as though at that point, the writers thought, okay, well, we've dragged this on for as long as we could. Let's just tell them who the villain is now. Like I said before, it was lazy. A better twist reveal would have been for something to foreshadow this, or at least for Nick to suspect Bellwether rather than the gullible bunny. In Disney's defense, they did give us a bit of foreshadow.
The wolves are the night howlers! If they took Manchas...
So we knew that there was a wolf responsible somewhere for everything that was happening. What we didn't see coming, however, was that it was in sheep's clothing. I mean, I gotta hand it to them, that's brilliant. But we should have at least gotten a bit more depth and complexity to the character. There should have been more grounds to establish her as who she was. Nick got his name from Oscar Wilde and had an entire plausible backstory for his crimes. Mr. Big was quite literally the Godfather reenacted. How come Bellwether doesn't get any of that, huh? They didn't do justice to the sheep. No wonder she grew spiteful. Bellwether didn't even get enough screen time for us to consider her a main character in the movie. In fact, I counted the number of times that she was shown in the film. Can you guess how many? It's 6. Of course she felt underappreciated. When I found out that she was the twist villain, I went back to the entrance scene and replayed it over and over. I was trying to look for clues that might give her away. I did discover one thing. I understood what Disney was trying to do with this particular character. I'll break that down for you in just a few moments. First, let's re-examine her introduction to the film. Bellwether is first shown to us on the day Judy graduates from the police academy. As the scene rolls in, she's only a tiny dot in the frame.
Has produced its first Police Academy graduate.
This was, of course, supposed to show us that she was barely noticeable. In contrast to the mayor, who is huge, Bellwether was absolutely tiny. Even when the camera zooms in on Lionheart, Bellwether's only standing in the background. And after she's pinned the badge to Judy's chest, the mayor sweeps her away with a paw, derogatorily making space for his own self. Considering this gesture and the other ones, I thought that it would have been more fitting for Lionheart to be the villain of the film. This is because he was clearly trying to be the quote-unquote good guy while being dismissive of those he sought to include. To get rid of him and then extend the twist reveal to Bellwether honestly seemed like a bit of a drag, and it didn't neatly fit any archetype of sheep being meticulously brainy. It just wasn't satisfying enough, and that's bad writing. That's loose ends. At the end of the entrance scene, Bellwether tried hard to fit into the frame before the shutter fell. When I watched this, I realized that that's what Disney had been trying to do all along, to give us an uncategorized villain who didn't neatly fit any archetype. The loose ends were actually bits of her wool spun into yarn and then woven into the intricate pattern of her plot. But the whole thing seemed more accidental than deliberate. And the reason that was so sad was because they tried to showcase Bellwether as someone who was meticulously crafty. It couldn't have been dumb luck that allowed her plan to fall so perfectly into place. But I'm not one to blindly critique, which is why I do have suggestions for how they could have made the whole thing better, like how she didn't get half the attention she deserved, not from Lionheart and not from the writers, but also by the lack of categorizing her as a villain. When Bellwether is observed in contrast to Judy, it makes sense for a sheep to rely on something other than bravery. Since they're naturally meek creatures, Bellwether would never have stood up for herself, especially to her boss, who was quite literally the token of valor and strength. But Disney didn't play this concept like they should have. Rather than sticking to the archetype of the brave lion and the fast bunny, they rather made the lion come off as a bit silly. Because of this, it didn't make sense for Judy to be the one doing the protagonism, and it made the unveiling of Bellwether's agenda less satisfying to watch. Some reviews claim that it was actually Bellwether who convinced Lionheart to keep the location of the missing animals a secret. While that's a plausible explanation, it doesn't tie into any striking demonstration of brains on her part. Nowhere in the film, other than at the end, did we see anything about Bellwether that suggested that she was clever to a cunning degree. She wasn't demonstrated as patient either, which was a characteristic we should have perceived, considering that she had to have lots of it for her evil plan to work. All we saw when we looked at her was someone who was nervous and constantly on edge. Was it because she was afraid of being found out? Were we supposed to perceive that? The only motif available to us about Bellwether was that she was a sheep. It's an essential quality of good writing to let your audience know that you trust them. You don't spell things out for them. You leave them to figure some things out on their own. That's great advice and one that should always be followed. But in order for it to work, the audience needs some clues. Where were the clues with Bellwether? It seems that Disney trusts us a bit too much. Or maybe it was that Bellwether's gentle, unassuming nature fooled us all. And so we didn't see her true face when she led Judy away from the crowd after having brewed a conspiracy.
Oh, you did fine.
Was this a clue? If it was, how were we supposed to have known that she was secretly an evil mastermind? To give Disney the benefit of the doubt, there's a subtle hint in her character design at this point. The sheep is dressed in black. Yep, that's right. It's a black sheep. Can't believe we didn't see that one. Bellwether is incredibly small in size and appears to be timid and non-threatening. She has a large tuft of wool above her head.
So fluffy.
And while her core self builds only a persona of mildness and vulnerability, the way that she dresses and accessorizes herself is supposed to give us some hints about her true nature. Assistant Mayor Bellwether wears glasses. These are supposed to be suggestive not only of a bookish and warm persona, but also of intellect. While this doesn't make sense on its own, it does add up when Nick, the only other person in the film who wears frames, puts on sunglasses. With him, they're supposed to suggest swagger. In the same vein, the sheep's glasses show us a meticulous and watchful gaze. And then it's the fact that the clothes she wears steadily get darker throughout the film. In the entrance scene, she's wearing a deep blue jacket with a red shirt underneath. Later, she's donned in deeper blue and gray. At the end, after Judy has successfully played an inadvertent role in the fulfillment of her schemes, Bellwether is dressed in black. While all of this was clever, it wasn't overt enough for us, as an audience, to catch, especially with so much else going on in the film. I also noticed that Bellwether likes to accessorize herself with a single gold bangle. At one point, she's even wearing a gold brooch. While this jewelry suggests inner desires for grandeur, opulence, and power, they just weren't obvious enough. And that's what made her reveal so frustrating. The character design of a twist villain is always supposed to display hints of malice. For example, Hans had a sharp nose and a defined jawline. We could use that to determine that he was tactical, at least. With Bellwether, it seemed that Disney wanted to throw us off guard. That's why they left her face so rounded off and gullible throughout the film. I mean, were we supposed to assume that just because she was senior undersecretary, she would be like Dolores Umbridge? It just wasn't fair to us. So now, let me get to the suggestions part. Of course, having written these up over the course of a couple hours, I don't know if they'd be sufficient. But the writers of Zootopia should have taken their time with Bellwether. Bellwether was a twist villain that Disney used to further and extend the plot. Indeed, it was with every interjection of Bellwether into the scene that the storyline moved forward, from Judy getting into the ZPD, to her being assigned the missing otter case, to her learning about a criminal underboss, and to the end of the film. But here too, the work was patchy. There were instances where Judy furthered the plot all on her own, such as meeting Nick Wilde, discovering the onions, and uncovering the truth about the flowers that they grew. Because of all this, the institution of Bellwether as a twist villain wasn't set neatly into place. In contrast to Hans, who was at least cold of heart and therefore tied in well with the general theme of Frozen. Bellwether really was just a side character who got dragged into a new role at the 11th hour. To avoid things like these, I have a few suggestions. 1. Don't skimp out on a backstory. The absence of a meaty origin story to associate with Bellwether left gaping holes in the plot of the film. 2. Ensure consistency. It is absolutely impossible for someone to conceal their true nature for a long period of time. If we had more context about when Bellwether joined office and what happened in her early days there, we might have been able to believe that she was the mastermind behind the zipping bullets. 3. Provide subtle clues about the character's true nature. With Hans, a lot of people said that he seemed to have been switched over at the last moment. With Bellwether, it looked like Disney was trying to give us trust issues. How and why did she go from Judy's biggest cheerleader and helpful friend to second-degree attempted murderer? 4. Demonstrate strong motives. Why were there absolutely zero indicators as to what Bellwether truly wanted? Like I've said before, if it was power, what exactly gave that away? If I had wanted to tweak Bellwether, I would pepper the film with odd coincidences throughout, and then link them all to the sheep. This would give the audience the message that I had meant for Bellwether to be the villain the whole time. Since she was in office, I would also draw heavily upon the politicians are corrupt card. I would have Nick begin to suspect the sheep long before the reveal took place, and use that to plant seeds of plausible doubt into the audience's mind. I also wouldn't frame the lion first, or if I did want to frame a lion, I would protract their falsely set image throughout the duration of the film. At the same time, I would make suggestions about a greater scheme at play than the lion would have been capable of pulling off. This would give the audience a clear villain to focus on while I gave them teasers about the truth. With Bellwether, Disney tried to sneak up on us with a wholly imperceptible villain, and while it's true that all war is based on deception, utilizing this trick again so soon after Frozen wasn't the best move to make. A lot of reviews also claim that Chief Bogo would have been a better villain than Bellwether. While I understand that the bull had an inherent distaste for prey, making him suitable for the task, I also believe that that wouldn't have worked. Bogo played his part well as the disdainful boss who got won over by exceptional performance. The most suitable villain for Zootopia seems always to have been Bellwether. It's simply that she was written very poorly. And that's what made her failure so sad. I'm not talking about her evil scheme to make Zootopia a dystopia. I'm talking about her falling short of being the villain that she was meant to be. And all of this could have been avoided if the structure had been put together only slightly differently. Here's what I think. Rather than the story starting with Lionheart as mayor, it should have started with Bellwether as one. As soon as she arrived in office, a missing animals case could have been filed. Bellwether could have gone on television and expressed concern. Judy could have made it her mission to find them. Upon getting closer to the truth, she would have learned that the animals had gone savage. When she reported it to the mayor, a press conference would have gotten called. Shortly thereafter, chaos would have ensued, and Bellwether could have made statements about how, as a prey herself, she wanted for other prey to feel safe. But then, Judy would have learned about the flower and run off to Nick. When the two of them informed Bellwether, she would have fired a bullet at Nick rather than saying a single word. And then she would have left, but the sly fox, having suspected this, would have already replaced the serum in the gun. For her backstory, we could have watched Bellwether get ridiculed by Lionheart when she was his assistant in the office. This would have made her motives a lot more personal than simplistic lust for power. I mean, the foundation for the character was laid out well enough for even me to develop a more suitable alternative for this character. There were just too many details that went amiss.
Sir, if we could just review these very important...
I sincerely believe that at this time, Bellwether was carrying around the files for her character development. Those that were never seen and slammed down by the writing team. If Disney had spent more time drafting notes on Bellwether's character, I sincerely believe that they would have churned out a much more refined twist villain than this one. That's just what I think though. What about you guys? Did anyone else think that Nick's character was underutilized in the film? I thought that he had more of a role to play than Judy's sidekick. Like Bellwether, he too had a lot of potential. It just wasn't teased out of him with careful deliberation.
Mutton chops.
Disney's venture into 3D films had them so excited about the evolution that they forgot that it wasn't the 50s anymore. People weren't simply going to ooh and ah at the quality of the graphics as they did with classical motion pictures like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. People need plot and characters now. We're simply not going to be satisfied with optimistic tales of animals who take a stand against racism. We need more, and I think that Disney had known this for quite some time. With Bellwether, I'm not exactly sure what they were thinking. Did they think frayed threads and dangling strings would be fitting for a sheep villain they knew was half-baked? Did they honestly believe that they could play into idioms like black sheep and a wolf in sheep's clothing, and that people would be okay with it? I don't get it. I really don't. All I know is that I'm glad Disney accepted that. After having produced a villain as perfect as King Candy, they didn't need to reinvent the wheel with twist villains. And even when Pixar, not Disney, did, they seem to have learned from their past mistakes and taken public criticism into account. We all hold a motion picture house as esteemed as Disney Studios to produce content that's worthy of the glory that Walt Disney cultivated. And we're all waiting for their next great film, their next big concept, something that warms our hearts like Wreck-It Ralph did. What did you guys think of today's video? How would you have spun Bellwether? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. I'd also love more recommendations about Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks villains that I can show you how to write, though my next videos could have a little different format. Would you enjoy seeing live-action movies for a change? Please let me know as well. And as always, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video with your friends. See you in the next one.